Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, April 11th, 2025, and our friend Alex Krainer is back with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you for having me, Nima. Greetings to everyone out there from Croatia, and good to be with you again.
Alex, what's going on with the world and the Trump administration with the tariffs and the way that they're trying to manage the situation between, I would say, between the United States and China? And here is what this Treasury Secretary of the United States, Scott Bessent, said about the war between the United States, this economic war between the United States and China.
Escalation, unfortunately, the biggest offender in the global trading system is China, and they're the only country who's escalated. And I can tell the rest of the world that I'm not sure whether it was the prime minister or the economic minister in Spain made some comments this morning. Oh, well, maybe we should align ourselves more with China. That would be cutting your own throat, because I can tell you that these Chinese exports that the U.S. tariff wall is going to keep out, that China, for all of you who can remember that Disney movie of the brooms carrying the buckets of water, that is a Chinese business model. It never stops. They just keep producing and producing and dumping, and it's going somewhere. And I think, Rob, at the end of the day, that we can probably reach a deal with our allies, with the other countries that have been long-term. They've been good military allies, not perfect economic allies, and then we can approach China as a group.
And he's referring, Alex, to the movie in 1940 in Disney. And you remember that was a huge...
I remember the scene that he was talking about. Yes. Look, Nima, it seems to me, the whole thing seems to me a little bit silly. I think they launched into a bluff. The Chinese called them and doubled down, and they didn't expect this. And so now they need to find a face-saving way of backpedaling from this situation. And now they're talking about maybe, if we all unite against China, then maybe we can browbeat them. We can force them to our point of view, and we can force them to capitulate to us. But it doesn't look very realistic at this point, and it makes the administration look weak. Look, some of what he's saying is true. China has been, how do you call it, a currency manipulator for many, many years. They have set themselves at an advantage with vis-a-vis other trading nations, especially the United States. They have attracted a lot of American manufacturing to China. They have deliberately tried to set up research and development centers in cooperation with Western corporations to learn from them, to poach the best R&D talent from Western corporations and all of this. Well, you could say that was abusive. You could also say that it's a legitimate rivalry. It's legitimate business competition. May the best man win. And in most of these endeavors, China wins. They have done a better job. Now, why has all this happened? We have to go back to 1971 when Richard Nixon severed the convertibility of the dollar to gold. And, from that moment on, they knew, the people in power. I'm not talking about Nixon or Kissinger. I'm talking about the people actually in power who are dwellers of Wall Street and the city of London. They knew that they were going to destroy the dollar. That it was only a matter of time, because the dollar at that point became a fiat currency backed by nothing. So if you destroy a country's currency, which was only a matter of time, then that means that you destroy, the empire loses its most powerful uh, you the most powerful enforcer of the empire, which was the United States, with all its military bases around the world, with all these carrier strike groups going around the world, making sure that everybody is subordinate to the empire. And they knew at that point that they would, down the road, need a new global cup, right? And they designated China as that new global cup. And almost immediately after after ending the convertibility of dollar, Nixon and Kissinger made overtures to China to open it up. And from that point on, Western financial and corporate giants went to China, uh, worked with the Chinese governments to open China up and to build it up into the global superpower. And if you read the statements by people like Henry Kissinger and George Soros up until maybe 10, 15 years ago, they were all explicitly saying that China was going to own the globalization process, that China was going to be the model society on which all other nations are going um, to model their own governance systems. And so they clearly saw China as the next global cup, as the next superpower that was going to take on the role of the United States in enforcing the global empire, of which China would be the enforcer, but they themselves, meaning the financial oligarchies of the West, would be the ultimate stakeholders, the ultimate beneficiaries. And so they set China up to be the winner in this global rivalry and competition. They made everything possible for China to do what it did. Even when back in the 1990s, many U.S. politicians were complaining about China being the currency manipulator, uh, the powers that be let it stand. They didn't allow the United States to sanction China. They didn't allow a redress of these imbalances and grievances from the United States. And so we saw progressively that China was winning at this game, and that more and more manufacturers were setting up shop in China, and that the United States became this importer of everything China, which in a way worked out for the United States as well, because they benefited from the China price, meaning that the local the domestic monetary inflation didn't translate into a consumer price inflation, thanks to the fact that China was exporting cheap locally produced goods to the United States. Well, now obviously the United States has been brought to a point where it has to redress that, and there's willingness politically from the side of the Trump administration to actually go through with it. But it seems to me that they didn't think things through correctly. They didn't pace themselves. They gambled on running a bluff by China, and they gambled on the notion that the Chinese were going to find all this intimidating, and that they were going to find themselves in a superior negotiating positions. Well, that didn't happen. The Chinese called their bluff. They responded with reciprocal measures. And so now somebody has to climb back from this escalation. And it seems to me that for Trump and his team, this is particularly painful, because they don't like to admit that they have been wrong, that they have blundered. And so we'll see what happens. But obviously, it is clear now that China is in a stronger position, economically, but also geopolitically. And then it's clear that China is closely coordinating their moves with Russia and with Iran. And I think that the Trump administration will have to, in one way or another, go back with a blank sheet of paper with their hat in their hand and say, "Hey, can we get along? Let's try to do this so everybody is happy."
Do you see that the main objective was China and all the other tariffs on other countries were just a sideshow for what they were doing, or they really meant the way that they were putting tariffs on each and every country on this planet?
You see, I'm not even sure, Nima. It appears to be this way. But, China is a unified sovereign country with which Donald Trump should be able to make deals, negotiate, discuss, and come to an understanding. On the other hand, you have the European Union, and it seems to me that Trump is particularly keen on confronting the European Union and actually seeing the end of it. And the more I look, the more it seems to me that this is almost always part of the policy. You see, a lot of the bulk of European exports go to the United States and the UK, and much of these exports go to the United States via China, because many European manufacturers outsource their production to China. They slap their brands on it. They say designed in Germany, designed in France, but it's made in China. And so that goes to China as well, effectively European exports. And so confronting China is an indirect way of also confronting Europe. And the tariffs that they slapped on European Union, he's been talking about this since early March. Actually, it's not something that happened on the Liberation Day. And then I also see that for some reason the US dollar depreciated against the euro by not exactly 10%, but around 9%. So even with these sanctions paused, all of a sudden, in a space of a few weeks, we have the dollar, which is now trading at around €1, euro, which is trading at $1.14, whereas about 3 weeks ago it was trading at $1.04. So just like that, all of the European exports to the United States became around 9% more expensive, whereas all the US exports going to Europe became 9% cheaper. And that's not even tariffs. When tariffs come into play, it's going to be even worse. And then there's the question of bombing of Yemen, which this wasn't your question, but I think it's related, because I watched about a week ago. You had a panel discussion with Colonel Wilkerson, Chaz Freeman, and was it Ray McGovern?
Professor Marandi?
Oh yes, Professor Marandi. That's right. And I, ever since this Operation Rough Rider began in the middle of March, I thought, this is so completely stupid. I cannot even imagine that they're doing this, because they've been bombing Yemen for 10 years now. The Saudis have, the British have, the Israelis have, the Americans have. We had 16 months of this Operation Prosperity Guardian. They bombed and bombed and bombed, and nothing happened. And now comes Trump with the Operation Rough Rider, and they bomb some more, and again nothing happens. And I thought, couldn't you have guessed after 10 years of bombing these Yemenis that nothing would happen, that you would not be able to achieve your objectives? Why are you doing this? Well, you remember Larry Wilkerson was talking about the tabletop exercise that they conducted with CENTCOM and AFRICOM and the Pentagon and a whole bunch of other American national security agencies and European national security agencies. And they came to the conclusion that the Red Sea was the quote unquote global hub of competitiveness. And this absolutely had to become a strategic focus for the Western powers. And that's when they started setting up their bases in Djibouti and created the AFRICOM and all of these things. So they obviously gave great importance to this trade route. And up until the 15th of March, this trade route was open to European trade. And since the beginning of the Operation Rough Rider, Red Sea has been closed to European trade. And the bulk of all the trade that goes through the Red Sea is Europe's trade. And that makes up, what did Larry Wilkerson say, 55 to 60% of all of the world's trade that goes through that, and most of it is Europe's. It's only 3% American trade that goes there. So this seems to me, whether by design or by accident, another way to kneecap Europe again. So, we had the blow up of Nord Stream 2. That wasn't the Trump administration, but nevertheless, there's a certain continuity of U.S. policy there. Then we have the tariffs. Then we have the Ukraine war, which they've been completely cut out of the loop from that. Then we have American imposing 5% of the GDP for the defense spending. Now we have this Operation Rough Rider that interrupted Europe's trade through the Red Sea. And now we have this currency manipulation. Well, I think it's currency manipulation because it's not very often that a major currency changes valuation by so much in only 2 or 3 weeks' time. So whatever the reason is, it seems to me that Europe is maybe the main target of the Trump administration, because everything they do ends up making the situation for the Europeans worse.
When you talk about Europe, and we know that Spain right now is doing something, moving and talking with China. But how about the other countries? Do you think that they feel that their survival is at risk?
Which countries are you
Europe.
referring
I'm talking about Europe.
Europe.
Do they really feel that their survival is at risk right now? Because we know that if, as time goes by, the competition between the United States and China would worsen. It's not going to get better and improve. And what would be the position of Europe? As we saw, Scott Bessent said that they're gonna cut your throat. And this is the way that the United States is not just talking about China, they're talking about themselves. If you go that way, we know how to deal with you. What is the way out for Europe? What is the solution for Europe?
Well, I think the first thing that's a solution is to get rid of Ursula von der Leyen and this whole European Commission. And I would take it a step further. I would say that the European Union, as it is constituted today, has to disintegrate. And I think that inevitably we are going in that direction. We've seen that the American administration, the Trump administration, is kind of supportive of all these sovereigntist movements in Europe. Marine Le Pen and AfD in Germany and Calin Georgescu in Romania, and I think that they will be able. Giorgia Meloni in Italy, not to mention, and I think that the Americans would prefer to have good, constructive relationships with Germany, with France, with Britain, with Romania, with Poland, with each country individually of its own, rather than dealing with the European Commission and other structures of the European Union, which is, as it is, I think that they are completely lost, because for the last 10 years, they have been obsessed with net zero policies and Ukraine. They haven't thought about anything else, it doesn't seem. They are complete. This whole thing I just discussed about the war in the Red Sea, the United States bombing Yemen. I don't think that the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, Kaja Kallas, any of them, I don't think they even this even registered with them that this is a massive problem for Europe. I don't think that they know how to deal with the United States and with tariffs. They have the whole business model of Europe has been based on getting uninterrupted, abundant flows of cheap Russian energy and then exporting finished goods of European industries to the United States. And now, they cut off the flow of energy from Russia. And now the Trump administration is cutting off their access to the American markets. And they have no idea what to do, it doesn't seem to me. And so they are in a completely reactive mode. Tariffs. So we're going to respond with our own tariffs. That's about it. There is no plan B. The only plan that they have is investing into rearmament with a view of going to war against Russia at the end of this decade. And so now they're stumped. They don't know how to run an economic policy. And the monetary policy, all they have is printing money and more money and more money. And so it completely doesn't work. This is like an orchestra where nobody knows what they're supposed to be playing. Everybody is harping on their own instrument in whichever way they see fit, and the whole result is a mess and a jumble. It's completely directionless. And I think that there's a risk that we go into the kind of disintegration that we saw with the French Revolution, that we end up, in Germany, in Britain, in France, that we end up seeing a civil war, and that the transition to whatever comes next is going to be bloody and violent.
You mentioned Georgescu. Here is what he said with Tucker Carlson. Alex.
Everybody knows that was a foreign intervention, and particularly from Secretary of State Blinken, that he intervened in the elections and simply dictate what the system have to do. And it's absolutely, everybody knows about this situation, including, of course, President Macron and Maia Sandu from Moldova as well. They intervened. But the most important was Secretary of State Blinken.
What did he do and say that affected your election and Romanian politics?
Well, simply was an intervention. They don't, very clear, they don't need free Romania. To be mentioned that the largest military base of NATO is in Romania. Probably you know about that.
Yes.
And of course, they want to launch the World War III from Romania. And with this situation, of course, they can involve all Europe and also United States. So these, they have interest. They have interest in war.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing that he says that they want to start the World War III from Romania. Your take, Alex?
Well, that doesn't surprise me one bit, and in fact, I think he's completely right. This is a centuries-old obsession from Western powers to dominate the Eurasian landmass. And to dominate the Eurasian landmass, they absolutely cannot have rival hegemons there locally. So, powers like Russia, China, India, Iran, they have to be cut down to size. And so that's why they have this blind obsession with regime changing Russia and partitioning it, which is what they have tried to do already in the 1990s when they had Boris Yeltsin there in power. Russia really came to the verge of disintegrating. Already the individual republics of the Russian Federation were no longer paying revenues into the federal budget. The local governors were not obeying legal requests from Moscow, and this is what the West has deliberately created. And then, there's also the access to Russian natural resource wealth, which is considered to be the largest of any other country in the world, estimated between 75 and 90 trillion US dollars worth. So how do you take all this when you can't defeat Russia militarily? Already, more than a century ago, Halford Mackinder made his proposal, and he said that the pivot power, which we now know is Russia, would be surrounded by so many beachheads, all from from its western borders down south all the way to the Koreas. And Halford Mackinder named Italy, France, Egypt, India, and Korea as those beachheads. Of course, over the last 100 years, the geography has changed. So, now you have Israel in the Mediterranean, you have Ukraine, you have Romania, you have Georgia. It doesn't matter so much which country it is. What matters is that you dominate those countries and that you are able to leverage them to continually impose wars on the pivot power, i.e. on Russia, and to continuously weaken it with a view of eventually being able to destabilize it, regime change it, and then put your own kind of Boris Yeltsin or Juan Guaido or Boris Nemtsov or Alexei Navalny into the Kremlin, who is going to do what you tell them to do, like Zelensky is doing today in Kiev, what the British tell him to do. So then, if that happened, then you would be able to use Russia as a bludgeon against China in the same way that today they're using Ukraine as a bludgeon against Russia. And then all of the Russian military might, all of their weaponry, would become theirs to use against other regional hegemons, primarily against China, but then also you could use it against India, you could use it against Pakistan, you could use it against Iran, or whoever you choose. And so the obsession to take down Russia is not going to go away. Even when they run out of the last Ukrainian, they're going to try to use Romania and Moldova and Georgia and Poland and the Baltic states. And so, if along comes some Kalin Georgescu who says, hey, it's not in our interest to really go to war against Russia and to build this massive military base that makes us a target, it would be much, much better for us to actually have a constructive cooperation as a relationship with Russia and to trade with them, mutually beneficial trade. Obviously, this completely disables the plans of the Western powers, so they have to make sure that Kalin Georgescu never comes to power. Same with AfD in Germany, for the same reason. They also want to have constructive cooperation as the way to relate to Russia. Same with Marine Le Pen. She's been wobbling around a little bit, but her intent for a very long time has been to deal with Russia in a bilateral way that's good for France and good for Russia. And so the the European powers now have to make sure that they prevent the popular pressures from bringing people to power who will simply say no to this march to war. And the popular will is to stop the march to war. There's no doubt about that. You know, we see that in Hungary, we saw that in Germany. I think that German elections probably were rigged to some degree, so to make sure that Friedrich Merz got to form the next cabinet. We saw it in Ukraine. In Romania. We also saw it in Croatia, where the president of the country was lambasted in the media as a Putin puppet, and he ended up winning something between 70 and 75% of the popular vote. Well, that makes it very, very hard to kind of try to unite the continent and to orchestrate the next big war, which they are planning for, the turn of the decade on 2029, 2030. This is why they're using judges and lawfare to disable the real democracy in Europe.
Today, Steve Witkoff went to Russia to talk with Russians. And we know that tomorrow they're going to talk, Witkoff going to talk that with Iranians. Do you see that is related to what's going on in Ukraine or the talks tomorrow with Iran? How do you see that? And
I think it is related, Nima, and I think it's related whether people acknowledge it or not. It's related because I always go back to the fact that they're open and explicit about it, that the conflict we are experiencing today is the conflict between two systems of governance. It's definitely a conflict between the European oligarchic system versus everybody else, independent nations, China, sovereign nations like Iran, China, Russia, Belarus. They want to take them all down, and I'm not convinced that the United States administration realizes this, or if they do, it's not apparent in what they say, in the way they act, because when it comes to Russia, they're no longer doing the bidding of the Western Empire. When it comes to Iran, they are doing the bidding of the Western Empire. So that seems incoherent. It seems contradictory. And I think that they will run into very, very stiff opposition. I would certainly expect that Witkoff will discuss Iran with the Russians, because what they have in common with the Russians is that neither the Russians nor the Americans want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But, they have that in common with the Iranians themselves, because the Iranians don't want to have a nuclear weapon either. So that shouldn't be a problem. But it seems to me that there's a fairly strong political faction in the United States that is still daydreaming about using Israel to cement an undisputed hegemony over the Middle East by taking down Iran. So if they took down Iran, they think that, all right, then we and the Israelis, we completely dominate the region, and then it's going to be whatever we say, and we're going to be the new sheriff in town, and there's going to be a 1,000-year empire there that we're going to run. Even Steve Witkoff, in a way, has voiced those opinions. So are these head fakes, or do they actually mean it? I can't say, because I can't really decide whether the Trump administration have thought things through and they know what they're doing, or they know at least what they want to achieve there, or whether they're making it up as they go along. And it's not a trivial question, because if you start from the premise that they have thought things through, that they have a strategy, that they know what they want to achieve, then you can kind of guess what their logical policy should be, what the next step would be, why they're escalating against Yemen, why they're arranging all this arsenal to bring down on Iran. But if they're making it up as they go along, then anything is possible. They you can't guess where they're going with this. And so I think that, of course, Witkoff will try, and the Trump administration, they will try to get Russia to lean on the Iranians to give up their nuclear program, to give up their missiles, whatever they want them to do, to promise not to come to Iran's aid, to not supply them air defenses, radars, whatever Iran might need. But I very much doubt that this is going to have any effect, because again, if you help the Western Empire contain Iran, then you're going to help them strengthen, and they are still your enemy. You're gonna help an enemy win a very important battle in a very important region. So I very much doubt that the Russians and the Chinese are going to cooperate in this. So I think that the only thing that the Americans are going to find in Iran is a defeat. It's once more, Persia is going to be the graveyard of Western empires. I don't see a way that they can avoid that. And then, I'm kind of encouraged that Trump is engaged in indirect talks with the Iranians, and that he is not coordinating those talks with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis, and that he said, if we take the military option, it's going to be led by the Israelis. Israelis are going to be the leaders on this, which means that Israelis are going to be responsible for the fallout and for all the consequences that might happen if they decide to try and attack the Iranians. So it's very difficult for me to say what the administration is doing, and I'm guessing. Do they have a strategy, or are they making it up as they go along? The fact that Trump speaks with Xi Jinping on the regular, and the fact that they speak with the Russians on the regular, to me is an encouragement, because if they are in over their heads, they're going to learn something about the new situation in the Western Asia, and the fact that Iran is not the same Iran that was there 30 years ago, that it has strong alliances with Russia and with China, that it has been designated by China as an anchor of the security architecture for Western Asia, and that it now has defensive and offensive weaponry against which neither the Americans nor the Israelis have obvious defenses.
Alex, it's so amazing to me that the Trump administration is trying to do the same that the Biden administration was trying to do in the case of Ukraine. They were trying to make communications with Chinese not to support Russia in Ukraine, which we know that China's main interest is Russia defeating the United States in Ukraine. And right now, it's not about Russia, it's about China itself. It's their interest in Ukraine. And right now, with the case of Iran, they're trying to do the same. Now is the Trump administration trying to somehow communicate and give some sort of, I don't know, try to manipulate, play around with the case of Ukraine in order to convince Russia, if you cooperate with us in Iran, you're going to benefit. Russia knows that. Russia knows this game from Ukraine. This is how is it? These people in power. It seems so much simplistic the way that they're thinking.
Yes, I agree, Nima, and to me it seems so dumb that I have to stand back and think, like, wait a minute, they can't be that dumb. This has got to be, they have to be pretending. which, maybe they are, but maybe they're not. I don't know. But for Russia, this is existential. I think that for China is existential as well, because if they took down Iran, if they managed to eventually take down Russia, which they will try, let's not forget that the Western powers have sponsored HTS and Al Qaeda and Al Nusra and all of these terror organizations, that they're still cultivating them, that they are now, that they have now taken over Syria. If they manage to take down Iran, then all of these terror networks their next target will be Russia, 100%. Dagestan, Chechnya, Kyrgyzstan, all of these nations would again become reactivated as new hotspots to destabilize Russia, to impose a terror threat to Russia, threat of separatism in Dagestan and Chechnya again. So there's no way that for some little bribe, the Russians will say like, yes, okay, you are the highest bidder. We're going to just let these Iranians go right down the river, and we're going to do better business with you guys. The Russians understand what they're up against, and again, it's a conflict of two systems of governance, which means that it doesn't matter who's in the White House now. Maybe they can get along with Trump and his team really nicely, and maybe they can like each other. But that doesn't mean that the real source of power in the United States, which is the same source of power in London and in Paris and in Berlin and in Stockholm and in Tokyo and in Warsaw and so forth, is still going to be pushing policy in the direction of winning back hegemony over the Eurasian landmass. And that the next presidential elections, you might have another Joe Biden in the White House. So you can't be transactional about this. You have to be strategic about this. And the strategy has to be to defeat the Western Empire once and for all. And where does the Trump administration stand on this issue? I don't really know. I don't really know, because while they're doing things right vis-a-vis Ukraine, in the Middle East, they're doing everything wrong. So we'll find out. But I think that inevitably they will not be able to prevail. They will not, in the same way that the defeat of the West in Ukraine is inevitable, so is the defeat of the West in the Middle East. That will happen, whether it'll be more bloody or less bloody is another question. But a defeat is coming their way 100%. And I think that the Russians and the Chinese, who are looking to end this 200-year continuity of permanent wars, permanent instabilities, so that the West could maintain hegemony over the region, they want to replace it with permanent peace, which means that they have to push the Western interests and Western hegemony out of the region. And so I don't think that Trump can reverse that. And he can certainly not reverse it by bribing the local leaders or by trying to charm them into, hey, do a deal with us. We're gonna have nice things for you. That doesn't work anymore.
The situation, by the way, as you've mentioned, in the Middle East, I think is of huge importance for China, because the stability of the Middle East is important in terms of the energy that they're getting from the Middle East. We know that all these Arab states are too much dependent on the United States, that they're not able to make any sort of move against the United States. And Turkey is in the process of being neutralized. And somehow they're neutralizing Turkey in Syria. They know what's going on with Turkey. And I think for many years to come, Syria would be the main source of chaos in the region. But are they going to be able to deal with the same sort of situation in Iran? Is that because, as you've mentioned, Iran is not Syria, is not. If they go to Iran, they're gonna lose, in my opinion. They're gonna lose big and faster than they have ever thought about this competition between the United States and China. That would be the end. I don't know how they're trying to manage that. And China knows what's at stake with the case of Iran.
Yes, I think, Nima, I 100% agree. Iran has had almost 30 years to prepare for this. They knew this was coming, that the clash with the empire was coming. They prepared themselves. They developed the weaponry that they need to confront the United States and to confront Israel. They have developed defenses. They have, signed comprehensive partnership agreements with Russia and with China. And let's not forget that the empire tried to take over Afghanistan, and they remained in Afghanistan for 20 years. And they took Afghanistan easily because there was Taliban there. They didn't have, much in terms of defensive weaponry. It was as they said, it was a cakewalk for the West. But nevertheless, they lost. So I think that in the case of Iran, not only would they lose, I think that they would be ejected from the region completely in a very short order. I think that most of their naval assets there would be sunk. Most of their military bases there would be set on fire and destroyed. And I think that Israel would sustain such debilitating blows there that they would not be able to recover from that. Who was it recently that was saying that the Iraqis were making a calculation that even if Israel launches a nuclear attack on Iraq, that Iraq would be able to continue fighting for another 2 to 3 years, and that the damage that they would inflict on Israel would be irreversible, that Israel would not be able to recover from that. That was Iraq 30 years ago under Saddam Hussein. Iran is much, much, much more powerful. Iran also commands a certain loyalty, not blind obedience, but a certain loyalty of a number of proxy forces in Iraq, of Hezbollah in Lebanon, which still hasn't been defeated. They talk about having defeated Hezbollah. They haven't. Of Hamas and of the Houthis in Yemen. And so an attempt to defeat Iran militarily would probably have devastating effects on the region. Jordan would probably fall. The political vacuum in Syria would probably quickly be filled by Iranian forces, if not Iran itself, then Iranian proxies. And I think that Syrian domestic resistance movements and the remnants of the Syrian Arab army that are still there and that are still striking at the HTH militants as we speak now would then gain in strength, and they would come up in the open, and they would probably, on a very short order, win back the loyalty of the Syrian people. So I think that the situation now, as far as Israel is concerned, is a house of cards. And the United States cannot change that. And I think that in the case of an attack on Iran, this house of cards would collapse very, very quickly. And I think that maybe this is the reason why the Trump administration decided to hold talks with the Iranians, and why Trump said, well, if it comes to the military option, the Israelis are going to be owning that one.
And it was so amazing that he said that if we're going to attack Iran, Israel gonna lead.
Yes, yeah, exactly, because he doesn't want to own the fallout, because the fallout is going to be absolutely awful. And so you can't say afterwards, oh, we did this. No, it's going to be like the Israelis did it. We tried to stop them. They wouldn't listen. So, this is on them now. Because you know that it's going to be a disaster.
Alex, do you see Russia? Because right now it seems that Europe doesn't help itself in terms of the conflict in Ukraine. But how do you see Russia seeing Europe? And do you think that they're reassessing, reevaluating the case of Europe? What do they think about Europe right now, in your opinion? Yeah, Alex gonna be back in a minute.
I apologize, Nima. I'm sorry. I had a cough attack, so I didn't hear your question. Can you
Yeah,
please?
my question is right now Europe and the way that they're trying to deal with the case of Ukraine, and it doesn't seem that Russia and just considering what the Trump administration, which was surprising to me, that the way that they're supporting Zelensky, I don't see any point behind this sort of attitude. But how does Russia sees Europe? How does Russia see Europe today? Do they really believe that they can have some sort of relationship in the near future? Or because I don't know if you learned that Europe is talking about Macron being the representative of Europe in the talks with Russia. I think Macron is nobody for Russia. Russia doesn't believe in anything that Macron says.
I think that Macron will be very lucky if he doesn't meet the guillotine some years down the road. He doesn't. He does not have democratic legitimacy in France. He he acts. He acts like a clown. One day he says this, the next day he says the opposite. Macron is really making it up as he's going along. He, I think, desperately wants to be some kind of a senior, wise statesman leading Europe forward, and he smells this opportunity because everybody else is even worse. Scholz, Merz, Keir Starmer, and so forth. So, France is probably, as far as Western Europe is concerned, the most robust power there, because it's the only one that doesn't have U.S. military bases on its territory, and it's the only one who has its own military industry that's pretty much autonomous. They can produce what they need themselves, and they have their own nuclear arsenal, which is they have sovereign power over the use of that nuclear arsenal. But Macron himself, I think, is a spent power. He shouldn't be the president to begin with. I think that he's extremely unpopular in France. And, in the secondhand information from military circles in France, is that they see that the most likely outcome of the current political situation in France is a civil war. So people in the military circles in France are preparing for a civil war, which is why I said that he can count himself lucky if he hasn't been guillotined some years down the road from here. I think that in Europe, the democratic processes are going to have to impose themselves and to sweep these governments out of power and to bring back, governments like government of Charles de Gaulle, like what we have now in Slovakia and in Hungary, governments that are going to be defending their nation's sovereignty, that are going to be looking for a way out of the European Union, that are going to go bring back national currencies so they can take control of their economic and financial policies and monetary policies. And then they can deal with other powers on a bilateral basis. And in that case, you will see individual nations having talks with the Russian government and formulating their relationship on a one-to-one basis. And 100% the Russians will always be open to those kinds of discussions and negotiations. And then, let's not forget that there's this, the reason why Ukraine and Iran are so important to China as well is because China is committed to this Belt and Road project and to the multipolar integrations and to creating a completely new security architecture for the whole continent. And let's not forget that one of the earliest formulation of these multipolar integrations has been from Vladimir Putin, who was proposing a common market from Lisbon to Vladivostok, and a process of integration that would take the whole Eurasian continent together. And I think that as European leadership sobers up, that is, they will not sober up, but other people will come to power, they will realize that there's a great deal of upside in talking to the Russians, to the Chinese, to the Iranians, to the Indians, forging economic business relationships and trade, and joining the BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative, rather than investing trillions of euros into defense industries and building up armies and preparing for a big war. So there's a huge downside in going with this one system of governance, what Macrons and Merzes and Keir Starmers of this world are driving for, versus going for constructive cooperation, which is, what the Russians and the Chinese are proposing. Their hand is extended. It'll have to wait until there are mature governments in European capitals who can reciprocate in good faith. And I think that is coming, because this is what the people want. And I think it'll be very, very difficult to try to convince the people of Europe that their best bet is to go to war against Russia. And even you can see that even the propaganda, even the demonization of Russia is now becoming a challenge, because they've been demonizing Russia and Vladimir Putin for 20 years solid now. And so how do you escalate from there? So they started talking about this, Vladimir Putin taking a bath in blood of deers extracted from their antlers. And they're serious about this, but nobody's buying it. Nobody's believing it. So how do you make somebody even more evil than that? Killing tens of thousands of deer so he could have a bath in their blood. So it's going to be very, very difficult. I think that we have a real chance to move in a different directions, to correct course, and to move into peace and prosperity for, not just now, but for generations forward. And that's definitely a better future than World War III on the old continent.
Alex, here is what the Chinese expert said, Victor Gao said to the British reporter.
In this scenario, to use your metaphor, the US has the bigger gun. And so China ends up having more to lose from this trade war, doesn't it? It can't sustain the loss of 15% of its export market, i.e. what you export to the US.
Not at all. China is fully prepared to fight to the very end, because the world is big enough that the United States is not the totality of the market in the world. So if the United States wants to go in that direction of completely shutting itself out of the China market, be my guest.
Yeah, and China will lose the US market, which, as I've said, is 15%.
We don't care. We don't care. China has been here for 5,000 years. Most of the time, there was no United States, and we survived. And if the United States wants to bully China, we will deal with the situation without the United States. And we expect to survive for another 5,000 years.
I hope there are people in the United States who listen to this guy and understand what he's talking about.
Yeah, I think that was absolutely brilliant, and I don't even think that the United States is 15% of Chinese exports. I think it's something between 3 and 10%. I'm not sure. I've come across a variety of figures, but I think 15% is an obsolete figure, or it's somebody's wishful thinking. It's not even that much. And then, China's strategy has been to develop the global South, to raise these countries out of poverty, in the same way that they have raised 850 million Chinese out of poverty, to make them affluent consumers so that they could afford goods and services made in China. They're setting themselves as the global manufacturing superpower. The United States has been an important market in this respect, but I think that the United States overestimates their importance in the world. This is no longer the unipolar moment. This is long gone. And so I think that the Chinese are quite right to say, okay, fine, you want to deal in bad faith, you want to deal with ultimatums and threats. We're just gonna go on our way. We're gonna move forward without you, and thank you very much. That's it. Sorry, you're muted.
Alex, do you think the problem of Europe is coming from the United States, as Georgescu was talking about, or as I do believe is coming from the United Kingdom, because their ego doesn't fit their body, and the way that they're talking about they're capable of doing this and doing that, and they're manipulating the situation in Europe in terms of Russia and China both. And we know that they're manipulating the situation, the position of Europe in the Middle East as well, with the case of Gaza, with the case of Iran. I think I see total influence of the British government on Europe.
Yes, well, absolutely. There's something quite mysterious about that. I don't quite understand it. Very recently, in February of this year, the British government signed a military cooperation agreement with the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Okay? Bosnia and Herzegovina is a republic of former Yugoslavia, right? So it's in the Balkans. They are, the whole country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, is constituted of the Muslims, Croats, and Serbs. Serbs are Orthodox, Croats are Catholic. So it's a mix. The government in Sarajevo is dominated by the Muslim faction, right? It's a Muslim canton in Sarajevo, and so the fact that they signed a military cooperation agreement with Great Britain it really mystifies me. I can't imagine why. It would make sense to me if they signed a military cooperation agreement with, let's say, Turkey, a fellow Muslim nation, or even with Croatia, because Croatia, the Croats and Muslims in Bosnia used to be allied against the Serbs together until the British destroyed that alliance. And so here you have a government in the middle of the Balkans signing a military cooperation agreement with a government of Great Britain, which militarily is a joke. So they're not doing it because Britain is this great military power that will help them, help strengthen them strategically. They cannot do that. They're not fellow Muslims. They don't have anything at all in common. So why are you signing a military cooperation agreement with Britain of all, not NATO, not the United States, not Turkey, not even Albania or Kosovo, or, somebody that makes some kind of a sense, but Britain. And so obviously Britain has some means of influence. And I think that that British means of influence. So if you talk to Bosnian politicians and people who are in the know of very, very complex and complicated Bosnian politics, they will tell you that the British are the dominant power in Bosnia, that Bosnia is crawling with British spies. I think that Britain's strength is severalfold. I think that they have, they're dominating the financial systems of the world still, because all these politicians, because let's remember, Britain also has military cooperation agreements outside of the scope of NATO, also with Sweden, with France, with Poland, with Ukraine, I believe also with Turkey. So somehow these policymakers in all these countries must somehow be incentivized, because they're not saying, let's have an agreement with the Brits because they are the most powerful military in the world and that will help us shore up our strategic defense position. So it must be money. Then they have a very extensive secret diplomacy and secret spy networks everywhere around the world. I noticed during the COVID pandemic that Tony Blair at one point was boasting that, quote, we have teams embedded in all the governments around the world. He said that. He was trying to make a point where that, we can manage this COVID pandemic and the responses because we have teams embedded in every government in the world. But, he was probably giving away something important there. He was running his mouth and he was telling us something important there. And then the British have a very well refined soft power, in the sense that all of these countries where they have dominant influence, they all end up sending their, all these key corrupt politicians end up having bank accounts in London. They end up having houses in London. They end up having their children enrolled in Oxford and Cambridge and other British schools. And then they go back and then they become influential in the local policies. And we've seen that with, for example, Radek Sikorski in Poland. He came to London, he went to Oxford, he became a member of the Bullingdon Club in London by invitation from Boris Johnson, and then after he was done with his studies, he was sent back to Poland, where his political career, he had to even change his citizenship because he was a British subject. And then he had to change his citizenship back to Polish. And then his political career took off like a rocket. And he became a very, very influential player in Poland. He is now the foreign minister. He was a foreign minister before. He was also a defense minister of Poland. He was a member of the European Parliament. He completely reformed the Polish foreign ministry and made it like a global power with 100 offices around the world and so forth. And then we saw that he played a huge role in the Maidan coup in 2014 in Kiev, and that he has played a very important role. Poland has played a very important role in the Ukraine war, and Radek Sikorski is still mixed up in all of that. Well, let's not forget that he is the agent of British power. And so, yes, you're absolutely right that Britain still has very, very important influence in foreign policy, American foreign policy, Israeli foreign policy, Europe's foreign policy, in the Ukraine war, in Poland, in Sweden, in Germany. And I think that it's partly soft power, it's partly financial power, and it's partly secret services and secret diplomacy that are in play, because it's obviously not their military power. So it's these other powers. And I think that they have refined and perfected these levers of powers for the last 200 years. I think that in the very same way, they still hold a very, very strong influence over American foreign policy. And we've seen that over the years in a few episodes. And so that is, you're absolutely correct. And I think that that today is no longer such a mystery. I think that the Russians, I think Belarus, Iranians, Chinese, I think that they're perfectly aware of this. They understand that, the head of the parasite is still in the city of London.
Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you, Nima. My pleasure. Until the next time.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.